and we move into the next session, which is the number 16, Internationalization and Diversity. So a totally new dimension, which we have not explored that much yet. So I would like to, without further ado, welcome the whole panel. Yes, you can switch on your cameras now. And I give the floor, or more correctly,
Thank you. Now you are muted again, but I guess you gave us the floor already. And I hope you can all hear me now. Yes.
yes,
Okay.
perfect.
Thanks a
Mr.
lot.
Kaldawai
To
and Mrs. Rimarshak could also switch on their cameras, please. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. And welcome everyone. I'm sharing my screen just like this now. You should see it. Please let me know if not. So welcome everyone, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening also from our side again, wherever you are and which one fits. Welcome to our session that we titled, as been mentioned before, Internationalization and Diversity, Competing or Complementary Imperatives. And just one more organizational instruction at the beginning. We have an interactive part. It's short. Everything is short in 30 minutes, but we would like to encourage you to take part. And it might be more handy if you keep also your cell phone close. If it has internet connection, it's also possible via the computer though. So that one at the beginning. So we are four, but you have all our information in the documents handed in before. So we won't introduce ourselves much. I'm Berit Stopper, and I'll start with the short activity with you. And then afterwards, we have a short input starting on a theoretical basis, going to the first case example from the US. From David Kaldewey, and then we have two more practical views on a German and a Polish institution from Goscha Rymazak and Katharina Schmidt. And please type in all your questions also during the parts. We will sort them out and also have one or two, hopefully, comments and questions at the end of our session. But of course, we would like to also get into more contact with you and follow also afterwards. So please type them in. And we have a survey as well at the end, which we will show and display. And we will also ask you to take part. This is always open, of course, also after the session. So it was planned to be interactively working with youth, and we try to do as much of this and also get your experiences in, because this is also what we are interested in from your side. So, and what is actually our question? So we would like to discuss with you and trigger a bit the two imperatives of internationalization and social cultural diversity in universities and higher education institutions. Actually the questions, if they are linked, and if yes, how they are linked. And of course, always the question is relating why they are linked, or why should they be linked. And before we do that, we would like to get you into the thinking of the two discourses as mentioned before. So we'd like to do a Mentimeter with you. We all know our Mentimeters now, probably because it's what we do these days. We do Mentimeters. For those of you who are not familiar with, it will be quite easy to follow. So you'd have to go to Mentimeter, and I'll share my screen already. Menti.com, please. And then type in the 7 digits. It's really about your first association. So please, there's no right or wrong. Do it intuitively and rather quick. You have 30 seconds per questions, and there are 2 questions only. So we start with the first question now, which you should see. So you can start already to get your first association here, and we see it's working already. So everyone who's not familiar, see above menti.com and then the digits that you just have to type in. And it's anonymous, so we don't see who is typing in, but we see you are typing in, which is great. And it looks like we have triggered a lot already during yesterday and today. So 5 seconds left for the first question, then we continue with the second one. Please send it in if you haven't done so far. So second question coming up. Again, just intuitively and quick rather. We leave it uncommented rather at this point. We can also come back to the results later again. Great, list is coming on. So 5 seconds left. Please send. Super. Thanks a lot. So we hope we got you into the thinking already. I see some of you are still typing in. I will unshare my screen now and give over to David Kaldewey, and he will also share his screen. We will come back to the results again.
So can you hear me? Okay, then I again have to start the slides. Thank you very much, Berit, for this introduction. I will start with a very short presentation and a specific case in the US. So first, as we all heard these days, in a nutshell, means that internationalization is not just an academic end in itself, but may have additional positive effects for the wider society. Whenever we use such a frame like IHAS, we ask why questions. Why internationalization? Why is internationalization a good thing? What is the good of it? And the manifold contribution to this conference show that of course, there are many answers to this question. And for our group, the starting point was the assumption that diversity is one possible answer to this why question. So it's not the answer, but it's a possible answer. There are good reasons to assume, for example, that internationalization enhances cultural national diversity on campus and thereby fosters intercultural communication, and not only for the exchange students, but also for the wider society. However, given this perfect fit at first sight, it is surprising that diversity is actually not often put forward as an argument in the scholarly literature on internationalization, and also not in internationalization strategies and policies. But why not? If we have two academic values, two both academic and societal values that reinforce each other, why are they not more systematically linked in practice? And starting with such observations and questions, we may assume that maybe the relationship status between these two values is more complicated than what one may expect at first sight. Therefore, it seems worthwhile to investigate internationalization and diversity as both independent and interconnected discourses in higher education. Actually, it's not even clear what exactly it is we are comparing here. Is it two institutional imperatives? Is it two academic values, two different strategic goals, or rather two administrative units in the administration? As a sociologist, I suggest that we first take a closer look of what is given phenomenologically. There's a well-known and influential internationalization imperative in higher education, and it has been there for decades. And there is a more recent diversity imperative. We can also know that those imperatives are supported by norms and values. We find in both cases something that is generally deemed valuable by many people in the field. These values, however, they are not free-floating ideas. They are to different degrees institutionalized in the social system of science, in policy documents, and of course in the university administration. So there are people and there are organizational units that are responsible to implement these values or goals or imperatives. Therefore, if we talk about how these two discourses relate to each other, then we also have to talk about how the administrative units at the universities relate to each other. For example, what is the relationship between a traditional international office and a more recently hired chief diversity officer, if there is one? Given that I have only a few minutes for this short presentation, I cannot deal with this question theoretically. Rather, I want to present an example from the United States. It's a quite extreme example, actually, that sometimes, or this example is often employed by critics in order to in order to complain that we see an excessive diversity bureaucracy in the United States. The example is the University of Michigan. It is a highly ranked public research university that in 2016 launched an 85 million 5-year diversity plan. With this budget, they founded an Office of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. And if we now compare the manpower of this new office with the International Center, which is a more traditional unit in the university, we see a kind of mismatch. The new office has some 60 people compared to 30 working in the traditional field of internationalization. So this brings us back to the question of the relationship between the internationalization imperative and the diversity imperative. We can ask how they embody themselves in administrative units and how much resources they get for which tasks in terms of money, in terms of people, etc. So what is interesting is that if you look at the same time then at the mission statements of these two units, they seem to be rather similar or at least related in goals. Both aim to foster basically a good campus community, a community that is described as global on the one hand or as inclusive and equitable on the other. I have not the time to go deeper into this specific case of the University of Michigan. Instead, I want to close by raising a simple question. Why are there two units instead of one? Why do they so systematically disconnect issues of internationalization and issues of diversity? And then the question for our panel, and then I hand over to Goscha and Katharina, is how does this look like if we take some, let's say, more normal universities in the European context? What can we see in these cases, how these two tasks relate to each other? So thank you very much. So then it's Goscha, it's your case.
Thank you, David, and welcome everyone. Now, based on the example of a Polish university, University of Łódź, I will provide insight into the relation between internationalization and diversity. The University of Łódź is the largest university in central Poland, located in a city with multicultural traditions. It is the third public university in terms of the number of foreign students in Poland. In 2019, about 1,800 students from over 90 different countries studied at the university. Moreover, there were also over 1,000 students on short-term exchange programs. Let's move on, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, could you come back to the previous one? In the highest leadership of the university, there is no office or unit whose name directly refers to diversity. The Vice Rector for International Relations and International Relations Office are involved not only in activities related to internationalization, but also in actions related to diversity. The process of implementing the HR excellence in research standard was an incentive to review the internal university regulation on counteracting discrimination, barriers to employing foreigners, and to improve internationalization at home. Almost at the same time, the university introduced a project called University Diversity, for which in the following year the university received an award from the European Universities Public Relations and Information Officers. Additionally, in 2018, as the first public university in Poland, the universities signed the Diversity Charter. In the Charter, the definition of diversity is very broad and it includes also nationality. According to the Diversity Charter, the university is obliged to create a corporate culture to foster diversity and to promote equal rights development. The next slide, please. The University Diversity Project is quite extensive. Its aim is to show the university as tolerant, modern, responsible, committed to integrating culture and also generations. The actions taken are expected to benefit not only the university, but also the society. Especially they are to integrate the multinational and multicultural society. For this purpose, different events are organized, such as International Cookbook, for example, Guest for Christmas, or Diversity Day. Additionally, the project is to engage business partners, local organizations, and the community. For that purpose, among others, the photo, for example, exhibition was presented in one of the most famous shopping centers in the city. Next slide, please. Moreover, to respect diversity in age, family status, nationality, and others, a diverse educational offer was presented. For example, weekend studies for working people, postgraduate studies for mature students. The undertaken activities are also to support people with disabilities and special needs. In the last year, support, for example, of sign language interpreters, psychologists, and rehabilitation classes for people with disabilities were delivered. The universities also offered financial support for students with disabilities or worse financial situation. Additionally, the university was the first university in Poland to introduce a 50% discount on tuition fees for candidates and students from post-Soviet republics, including Ukraine. This led to an almost 3 times increase in the number of Ukrainian students in 2016. And currently, the university is getting first mover advantage. Other actions undertaken also to develop internationalization abroad are, for example, student research grants offered to develop young people's interest in science. The funds are especially dedicated for the implementation of student research, their participation in international conferences, and students' mobility. Due to limited time, I now giving the floor or screen to Katarina. Thank you.
You're muted, Katarina.
Sorry, yeah. A warm welcome also from Dresden in the very east of Germany. You can see a couple of numbers about our university here, but they don't really count here today. I'm looking at the issue of internationalization and diversity. On the one hand, from the internationalization point of view, and also from the point of view of a practitioner who's been doing this for 15 years. And so I'm looking at it at a slightly different angle, maybe than our two scientists so far. And what I would like to do is look how we try to combine these two areas. Could you go to the next slide, please? So I think we are all clear that we should combine these two fields and that we should look at these imperatives together. But if we just want to do this, there are so many people we would have to involve. And this maybe goes a little bit back to what David was saying in the beginning, you know, who's doing this where in the university. And if you look at this in the Dresden context, you can see that we have, for one hand, we have a vice rector for university culture. And in his imperative falls the staff unit diversity and management and the unit university culture. And then we have a chief officer technology transfer and internationalization, and of course the vice rector education, and they had the team strategy and internationalization within the international unit. So you already have 3 heads within the rectorate and their units working on this. And if you look at the cross-sectional topics below, all of these topics, and they are just few examples, should be worked together and discovered together. And you don't have to look at the whole word cloud I have on the right side, but there you can see who all else should be involved in this. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? When we look at this from the internationalization angle, we look at it from the one hand, internationalization at home, and also within that, the internationalization of higher education in society. And that's how we try to tackle these very cross-cutting, cross-sectional topics I mentioned before. Can you go to the next slide, please? These are just 3 projects or 3 topics we're looking at currently from internationalization. You can see that they, not all of them have to be involving diversity and internationalization to the same amount or account, but they all would profit from looking at it from all of these different angles. And so what we're trying to do is right now to develop approaches to our welcoming culture, as well as the issues of dealing with discrimination experiences. And of course, our overall commitment to society and a world open culture, which is really important to us, with all of these actors involved. And that's the big task for the future. And we'd really like to hear from all of you of your experience now and in the future. And with this, I give back to Berit.
Thanks, everyone. So we have had our 3 short inputs. We are very happy, as all of us mentioned now, to also have you share your experiences and your background with this kind of link that we have presented now in 3 very different examples. And so far, please let us know if there's any question on any of the inputs, please, and also comments or sharing right in this very moment, if possible, to type it in that quick. We can share the results maybe of our first Mentimeter, if this is possible from your side, David. Otherwise, we share our last slide. Because we originally really wanted to also get in touch with all of you to know how it's actually in your institutions, and this is also why we have organized this survey, and we hope the link will be displayed in the open chat that you also see. So now we see the results again from your first associations on internationalization and also diversity, and I think quite interesting also on one of the diversity pages, we can go through again to some of them, was university policy. So it shows that even one of the first associations with diversity was that it has to do with university and the policy level, and not necessarily the first associations with which are more on a theoretical and context base. So thanks a lot for these first impressions on the topics. And maybe we can share also our last slide right now, because they are, first of all, our contacts, but as well our survey link, but it should also be in the chat for you. We would really like to ask you to take part in it. It's also anonymous, and it's just your background and your institutional experiences with those 2 governance structures. So this please feel free to take part in it. Of course, it's also online later in the afternoon or also tomorrow. So in case you'd like to follow the next session, of course, you can also do it afterwards, but anytime we will be happy if you share anything with us.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Because I'm
Please.
the, you know, if you're a panelist, you're not able to use the Q&A. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, then please.
Yeah, I would like to come back to a point, a fantastic, fascinating point that Professor Kaldewey made about the disconnect between the diversity office and the international office. And nicely, you know, the Michigan State example, I would love to hear what John Hutzik has to say about that. You know, one of the pillars of internationalization exactly residing at that institution. And indeed, you picked up a point that we found also in the study as a disconnect between the international office and social engagement departments. My question would be to all of you from a practical perspective or whatever, what would you see as solutions to that? How could this disconnect be overcome?
So if I may take up, I think we are not yet sure whether it's generally the best solution to connect. So I did some studies in how German universities deal with this question. So I had a sample of 50 universities, and I found that some of them closely connected it, some of them disconnected if you look at the management level of the university. So there seems to be, and for me, as a sociologist, this is basically interesting. There is no standardized strategy of how to deal with it. It's just possible, and there are good reasons to connect it. But of course, this would also mean that there needs to be a general strategy of why to do so. And I mean, the case that Katharina presented from Dresden shows that it's complicated. And so maybe in some cases it's too complicated, and it makes sense to have more tasks, more functionally differentiated with different units. So I think we are not yet at the point that we can say it's a good thing, but it's more the surprise that in many cases universities don't think about it. And I think the American case is extreme insofar as it just happens that they, for example, have student protests regarding racism and trouble on campus, and then they need a solution. Then they put a diversity office on campus with a lot of money. German universities, and I think the Polish university is probably the same, they couldn't afford it. So in a way, because we cannot afford it in simply building up these huge new diversity offices, it would be, in my view, a pragmatic reason to think about, okay, can we take what we have and bring in these new tasks in what we have? And this could, for example, mean that the international offices from themselves take over some responsibilities.
Thank you also for that question. Katharina or Gosha, would you also like to comment then?
Yeah, I wonder whether, you know, this growing responsibilities of the international offices, you know, that has been growing so much over the past 15 or 20 years, you know, where, you know, at first it was incoming students and scholars, yeah, and then it was also outgoing, and now it's everything up to digitalization. And, you know, where is the end of it? And, you know, yesterday we had this example of maybe international office and transfer office should be together. And so I don't know if it's better to put all of it under one roof, or maybe it's more of a micro teams approach in the future, where you have more of these little units that deal with certain issues, and then they work together on these cross-cutting issues. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see how the universities are going to deal with that.
Thank you. We have one question, but we might also do that in a written form. Gosha, maybe you want to do the last statement on that, because then we have to end as well.
But you're perfectly then in time. That's great.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, if we look at Polish university, that is the case which I presented, it's not typical one. So probably to answer this question, it would be great to conduct research among the rest of Polish university, which we have quite a lot. So yeah, it's too early to answer this question, I think.
Thank you very
thanks
much.
a lot for that question. And I think we hand over to you then, and the other questions we'll take through the chat. Thanks, everyone.
But thanks very much. Again, like all before, a perfect timing. And as I always like to say, this is better than a real conference, because in a real conference, your remaining questions would be lost. Here, not the case. I will leave you in for a few more minutes so that you can answer the last questions in writing as a panelist, before I then sadly have to demote you, as it's called, to a participant. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting session.